Carrie Brownstein, Corin Tucker, thank you so much for joining us here on KCRW. Stoked to talk to you about Little Rope. It's a phenomenal record and getting lots of love, well-deserved, and it's really a remarkable next step in a pretty remarkable tenure as punk icons. Little Rope is really raw, both musically, lyrically. It leans into brokenness, flaws. Talk a little bit about how you kind of continue to channel this renewed urgency into your work together after 30 years together. How do you keep up the fight in your art?
I think that for us, we came to music through punk rock and through art and through, people that really wanted to do it on their own terms and wanted to make music on their own terms and write about, their own stories. And so I think that we've always come at music from a very, primal place that means a lot to us. And so I think we still kind of approach it that way when we write together.
Yeah, and I think that the sonic language that Corin and I created in Sleater-Kinney, it is a vessel for restlessness and urgency. There's so many other parts of our lives where we don't have that allowance or license for the wider breadth of emotions, the ire, the anger, the pain. But Sleater-Kinney provides such a wide canvas for that, as well as the counterparts, the joy and levity. So I think it's pretty natural for us to funnel some of those wilder moments into this band because it is the lexicon that we created for that purpose.
It almost kind of reminds you that stuff is still inside and not to get calloused over, but rather you kind of keep that channel open, through continuing to collaborate together?
Yeah, well, I think, part of the task of being human is to remain teachable and porous. That's how you maintain a sense of compassion, or even hopefully some optimism. And I think playing music is a way of continually connecting us to each other, to our bandmates, to our community, to our fans. And it's through that connection and communion that we do, I think, in some ways remain raw because you're aware of other people's vulnerabilities and you're not isolated or insulated from that.
I want to talk a little bit about Untidy Creature, a real whaler. It's a song about a relationship, but I know that it also kind of evolved from the news of Roe v. Wade getting overturned. Can you talk a little bit about writing that song and how its themes evolved? And also, Corin, if you could talk a little bit about how you developed your vocal performance for that as well.
Yeah, it's funny because Untidy Creature was actually the first song that we wrote out of these songs. And when Carrie played that guitar lead, which is so anthemic, I just wanted to sing to it right away. And it just came together pretty quickly, that it just sounded like it belonged in a stadium to me. And so that's where the vocal comes from, but we weren't entirely sure about the song at first, because we were like, well, was it too easy? Is it not different enough from other stuff that we've done? And so we kind of put it on the back burner. And this was 2021 when we first started writing, and then a lot of stuff happened. Roe v. Wade was overturned. There was just all this sadness and frustration and anger. And the vocals in that song are it's a special place. And so as I started working on the lyrics, it just, you were talking about keeping a channel open. It was a channel that was just open for me. And so it's all of those feelings got put in there. It's a mirror of a personal relationship and a personal viewpoint but it's also a mirror to what's happening to, how women are feeling in this country, and how we feel like we're being seen in this country. And so to kind of push those things both at the same time, that's kind of the channel that kind of developed in that song for me.
Kind of like when there's no words left to say, you just gotta...
At the end, yeah, when we recorded that song, we went into the studio, and we were lucky enough to work with John Congleton on this record. And I said, John, at the end of the song, I'll just be wailing. And he's like, okay, maybe just step back a little bit, And that's how that song turned out.
So I want to bring up something that I know you've had to talk a lot about on this album cycle, which is that Carrie, you lost your mother and stepfather tragically in a car accident while working on this record. And you've talked about how, working on the record provided you with kind of structure, familiarity at a time, when grief otherwise makes you feel like completely unmoored. But one thing I'm wondering is, what was it like channeling such a vulnerable and deeply personal experience into something that you knew would eventually be shared so publicly and, also open to other people's criticisms and interpretations? Like, was that part of... Were you thinking about that all during the record, or was that sort of something that you thought about after? Maybe you just haven't thought about it.
Well, I think, part of it goes back to my first answer in the beginning of this conversation, is just that this band is just an appropriate container. It is the only container, I think, in my life that I share with Corin, where we've always dealt with heaviness. We've dealt with things that are dark, and, just the heaviness, the sort of despondency, going back to our earliest records. You can hear just in the vocals and the guitar, it's very fiery, it's very guttural. So that wasn't that strange to me, to have Sleater-Kinney as an outlet for something, that was very uncomfortable. But the songs, we had written most of the songs before the accident. So in some ways, it was less about a lyric changing, but about how we tended to the songs. It was about caretaking. It was about, just like being particular about every note, every structure, the composition and the arrangement, because when you're grieving, there's so much that you're unable to do. There's so much that you're not able to say, and so much of the scaffolding of your life starts to dissipate. So what I wanted to work on and to build was something that was living and breathing, which were these songs. So I think I wasn't so worried about the lyrical content. A lot of these songs are not directly addressing that. But it became the ritual, the choreography of the music and the writing was something that I could just do. So I mean, with any record, I can't really worry about, what other people are going to think of it. That's a part of, it's difficult, but you can't approach records worried about like what critics are going to say or your fans are going to say, no matter what the topic is. So it was just part of a journey. And Sleater-Kinney has been part of my journey for such a long time that life is dragged into this band, and this band is dragged into life. It's symbiotic in that way. So it's just, death is part of life, and this band is part of my life. So it's all one big mess.
Yeah, and I think, like, just adding to that, I think that over the years, we have found that, like, sharing those stories helps people. Like, telling your story, even if it's dark, even if it's hard, those are actually the stories that people are like, you know what, I was listening to that, and I was going through something, and it helped me. And we found that. Like, that's why we do this, is because there is that connection. There is that reciprocity between our fans and listening to the music, and that we know that it's sharing is something that can help lift people up too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes kind of like a shared scaffolding in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about not just Little Rope, but the Frayed Rope Sessions, which is the new EP that you guys put out. It's 3 songs from Little Rope that were reworked, and that definitely feel of a piece with the main record, but are definitely stand in contrast. They're pretty sparse, but also with some really gorgeous string accompaniment to them. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the recording process differed for each, and how you see them complementing each other. Maybe was there a different kind of catharsis for making the EP?
Yeah, I think we were fortunate enough to work with the composer Mel Garrison from Portland, and she does strings composition for films. She scores films, but she was generous enough to score to the songs with an actual string quartet, which we've never done that before, and we wanted to try something different. So that was just like such a great opportunity to work with very different musicians, different composition, but to take the songs that we've written and give them sort of new light. It was really fun, It was interesting. It was hard to sing to, but a good challenge, I think.
Why did you choose to go in that direction sonically, and just why did you choose to rework them at all after having done the LP?
I think it's just something we haven't done before. We've made, this is our 11th album, and we've never really had the time to go in and deconstruct our songs. But I think in the last couple years, for the 25th anniversary of Dig Me Out, we did an album called Dig Me In. It was a covers album. And it was an opportunity for us to hear our songs in a different way. We don't hear a lot of Sleater-Kinney covers. I think we're maybe a pretty tricky band to emulate between our detuned guitars and Corrin's vocals. So I just think, I think it unlocked for us this notion of deconstruction and reassembly and, just kind of a transmogrification of things. So after the Dig Me In and having the opportunity post Little Rope to go in and kind of rework the songs, we were curious about that possibility. So we went for it. We had some time. It's just not, we used to just literally, between, 1995 and 2005, I think we put out like 7 of our records or something like that. So we didn't used to have a little, that window that we try to give ourselves now.
I want to turn to Hunt You Down. Talk a little bit about finding your voice on that song, Carrie, because this is a very guitar-leaning record for you, but you do take vocals on this one. It is very pointedly about grief and sorrow. How did that develop for you?
This is a song that we had. I remember writing this song, and we just could not crack the chorus. It had these verses. They were kind of dancey and had this forward momentum and all these guitar riffs, and we just kept subbing in different choruses, trying different melodies. And I always had kind of that, the verse had this kind of preacher quality to it. There was like sort of a real desperation and reaching, but the lyrics weren't quite there. And then I was listening to an interview with this poet and undertaker named Thomas Lynch. He works out of Michigan, and he had been meeting with a father who had just lost a young child, and the father said to Thomas Lynch, who at this time was in his role as a funeral director, the thing you fear the most will hunt you down. And it struck Thomas Lynch, and it struck me when I was listening to it, and so I decided to build the chorus around those words. And then the rest of the lyrics came together in the verses. And so, yeah, I felt like my role on this record was more in the writing and reharmonizing and arranging and guitar, but, I do take, it's definitely the most singing Korn's done, I think, probably since Dig Me Out. But there are a handful of songs like this one that just, I wrestled with for a long time, but I'm really happy with how it turned out.
So last question for y'all. This record is definitely a document of, living in a world that's kind of in perpetual crisis, both on the personal level, on the entire world, society level. Where do you find hope?
Corin?
I think music itself is hope. It's an act of hope. To be singing, to lift your voice, to have melody. I think the whole process of it is an act of hope and, wanting things to be different. The whole process of it. That's really where it comes from, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's always something about that question or about like the concept of hope that feels sort of pat, or, that there's something that feels like inadequate about the idea of hope. And I try to think in terms of faith, like what gives me faith? What gives me like just a belief in wanting to be alive and, wanting to protect the people I love and to, protect this planet and the people on it. And I would say that art is one of those things for sure. So I do agree with Corin. I mean, because it's a lifeline that, and that you send out to other people. And if you're lucky, they take the other end of it, and you get through things together. So I think art and shows, being in a room with a bunch of people is very special. I think it's something that, it's not that we took it for granted before, but now it just seems so miraculous in some ways to just, you look out at the rest of the world and there's so much suffering, and to just bring, 500 or a couple thousand people together in a room and have us all experiencing the same thing, that's nothing shy of a miracle at this point, because we don't really know where we're going to be tomorrow. So yeah, that gives me faith for sure.
Cool. Well, Carrie, Corin, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for a killer performance.
Thanks for coming here. Thanks for this
Thank you.
interview.
Please, we need you.